Every person who has ever completely transformed their life can point to one moment. Not a series of moments. Not a gradual accumulation of small changes that eventually added up to something different. One moment. One decision. One fork in the road where they went a different direction than they had been going, and everything, absolutely everything, changed because of it. The question is not whether that moment exists for you. It does. The question is whether you will recognize it when it arrives. Or whether you will do what most people do, feel it, hesitate, and then walk past it in the direction of the familiar. Stay with me. Because today we are going to talk about that decision. What it is. Why it is so hard. Why it matters more than almost anything else you will ever do. And how to make it, completely, irrevocably, with the full weight of your intention behind it, before this conversation ends. The nature of the one decision. People spend enormous amounts of time trying to change their lives from the outside in. They change their environment. They change their relationships. They change their job, their city, their wardrobe, their routine. They add new habits and subtract old ones. They read the books and attend the seminars and write the affirmations on the mirror in dry erase marker. And sometimes these things help. Sometimes they produce real, meaningful improvement. But if the one decision has not been made, the internal, foundational, identity-level decision that precedes and gives power to all external changes, then the improvements are temporary. Because they are built on the same foundation that produced the life you are trying to change. You cannot build a different life on an unchanged foundation. And the one decision is this. The decision to stop negotiating with your own potential. Not the decision to try harder. Not the decision to be more disciplined, more motivated, more consistent, although all of those things will follow naturally from this one. The decision to stop treating your own greatness as a question that still needs answering. To stop living in the conditional tense, when things settle down, when I have more money, when I feel ready, when the timing is right, and to step, completely and without reservation, into the unconditional. I am doing this. Now. With what I have. From where I am. That is the decision. And it sounds almost embarrassingly simple. Until you try to actually make it. And then you discover that it is the hardest thing a human being can do, because it requires you to do battle with every fear, every doubt, every conditioned story about yourself and your limitations that you have been carrying, in most cases, since childhood. The weight of the unlived life. There is a particular kind of pain that is very difficult to name. It is not the pain of failure. Failure hurts, but it is clean, it has a cause, a shape, an event you can point to and understand. This pain is different. It is the pain of the life you have not yet lived. The version of yourself you can sense but have not yet stepped into. The potential that sits just beneath the surface of your current existence like a fire that has never been given enough oxygen to fully ignite. The ancient Greeks had a word for the highest version of a person, the fullest expression of their potential. They called it eudaimonia. Marcus Aurelius translated this through the Stoic lens as living in accordance with your deepest nature, your truest self, the rational and purposeful core of who you actually are. The unlived life, the gap between who you are and who you are capable of becoming, is not just a personal loss. The Stoics believed it was a philosophical one. To have been given the capacity for greatness and to have negotiated it down to something smaller and safer, to have traded your eudaimonia for comfort, was, to them, the most profound waste imaginable. Not because comfort is wrong. But because it is not the destination. It is a rest stop. And too many people have been parked at the rest stop for so long that they have forgotten they were on a journey. Let me tell you about a man named Raymond. Raymond was 63 years old when he sat across from a doctor and received news that reorganized everything. It was not the worst news a doctor can deliver. But it was serious enough to make Raymond do something he had not done in years. Think. Really think. Not about the next deadline or the next obligation or the next thing on the list that was always growing and never shrinking. But about his life. The whole of it. The arc of it. What he had done with the time that had been given to him. And sitting in that doctor's office, Raymond had a realization that arrived not with drama but with the quiet devastation of absolute clarity. He had been careful his entire life. Carefully employed. Carefully behaved. Carefully contained within the boundaries of what was expected, what was approved, what was safe. He had a good life by every measurable standard. And yet, and this is what sat in his chest like a stone, he could not point to a single moment where he had made the decision to fully, completely, without reservation, go for it. Whatever it was. The business. The book. The conversation he kept postponing. The life he kept meaning to start living when conditions were more favorable. Raymond wept in his car for 40 minutes after leaving that office. Not out of self-pity. Out of recognition. He had been standing at the fork in the road his entire adult life, and he had been so focused on the safety of staying still that he had confused stillness with wisdom. It was not wisdom. It was fear wearing wisdom's clothing. And Raymond, at 63, with new information about the fragility of time, made the decision he had been postponing for decades. He went all in. Not recklessly. Not without thought. But completely. Without the internal negotiation that had been the background noise of his entire adult life. And the 2 years that followed were, by his own account, the most fully alive he had ever felt. Not because everything worked out perfectly. Not because the risks resolved cleanly. But because he was finally, for the first time, living in alignment with the full truth of who he was. The one decision changed everything. It always does. Why we negotiate with our own potential. If the one decision is so powerful, and the evidence, both philosophical and empirical, suggests overwhelmingly that it is, then why don't more people make it? This is the question that genuinely matters. Because the answer is not laziness. It is not stupidity. It is not a lack of desire or vision or passion. The answer is fear. But not fear in the simple, obvious sense. It is a very specific, very sophisticated, very well-disguised form of fear that the psychologist Abraham Maslow once called the Jonah complex, the fear not of failure, but of success. The fear of your own greatness. The fear of what it would mean, what it would demand, what it would cost, what it would require you to release, if you actually became the fullest version of yourself. Because becoming the fullest version of yourself is not comfortable. It requires you to outgrow things you have been comfortable inside. Relationships that fit the smaller version of you but feel constraining around the larger one. Identities you have built your entire sense of self around. I am the responsible one, the careful one, the realistic one, the one who doesn't take unnecessary risks, that the fullest version of you has simply moved beyond. It requires you to disappoint some people. To become unfamiliar to others. To sit with the discomfort of being in transition, no longer who you were, not yet fully who you are becoming, in that uncertain, uncomfortable, necessary middle space that most people flee back to safety rather than walk through. Epictetus understood this with the sharp clarity of someone who had learned it in the hardest possible conditions. He wrote, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid with respect to external things. The one decision will make you look foolish to some people. It will make you look naive, reckless, unrealistic. The people who are most invested in your smallness, consciously or not, will offer you 100 sophisticated, reasonable-sounding arguments for why now is not the right time, why the conditions are not favorable, why the safer path is the wiser one. They are not necessarily wrong from where they are standing. But they are standing in a different place than you need to stand. And the one decision is the decision to trust your own vision of your life more than you trust their fear of it. The anatomy of the decision, what it actually requires. I want to get precise here. Because I think one of the reasons people struggle to make the one decision is that they don't fully understand what they are actually deciding. They think the decision is about certainty. About having enough information, enough preparation, enough guaranteed safety to justify moving forward. But the one decision is never made from certainty. It is made from commitment. There is a fundamental difference between these two things that most people never fully grasp, and that difference explains why some people move and others stay frozen at the fork in the road indefinitely. Certainty waits for proof before moving. It says, "Show me that this will work, and then I will commit." Commitment moves first. It says, "I have decided this is where I am going. I will figure out the how as I move." The Wright brothers did not have certainty when they stood at Kitty Hawk. They had commitment, a commitment so total and so specific that it reorganized their attention, their resources, their daily actions around a singular purpose until the impossible became inevitable. Every person who has ever built something meaningful from nothing has done it this way. Not because they had more information or better conditions or superior talent. Because they made a quality of decision that most people never quite reach, the decision that closes off the retreat back to safety and makes forward the only available direction. The Stoics called this prohairesis, the faculty of intentional choice. The capacity to choose not just what to do, but who to be. Not just the next action, but the fundamental orientation of your life. Making the one decision is an act of prohairesis. It is choosing, at the deepest level, the person you are going to be, and then organizing everything else around that choice. Short story, The Sculptor and the Marble. Michelangelo is reported to have said, when asked how he created such breathtaking sculptures, that the sculpture already existed inside the marble. His job was simply to remove everything that wasn't it. I have thought about this image for a long time. Because I believe the greatest version of you already exists. Not as a fantasy. Not as an idealized fiction that bears no relationship to who you actually are. But as a real, specific, particular human being, with your exact gifts, your exact history, your exact set of experiences, living at the fullest possible expression of what those gifts and experiences have prepared you to contribute. The one decision is the decision to start removing everything that isn't that. The habits that are comfortable but corrosive. The relationships that are familiar but diminishing. The stories you tell yourself about what is possible for someone like you, stories often written by people who didn't know any better and passed them to you before you were old enough to question them. Remove what isn't the sculpture. Not all at once. Not without care. The sculptor does not attack the marble. He works with precision and patience and deep respect for what the material is capable of becoming. But he works. Every day. Intentionally. Removing what doesn't belong. Until the thing that was always inside the marble stands fully revealed. That is what the one decision sets in motion. Not a single dramatic transformation. But a daily, purposeful, patient removal of everything that has been obscuring the person you were always capable of being. The moment of decision, what it feels like. I want to describe something to you that people who have made the one decision consistently report. The moment of the decision does not feel the way you might expect it to feel. You might expect it to feel triumphant. Cinematic. Like a door swinging open with light flooding in. And sometimes it does have that quality. But more often, in the real, non-cinematic, quietly honest accounts of people who have actually made it, the moment feels something like this. Terrifying. And also, underneath the terror, like coming home. Like something in you that has been held very tightly, a breath you have been holding for years, finally, at cost, releases. Not relief exactly. Something more complex than relief. The feeling of a person who has finally stopped arguing with the truth of who they are, and surrendered, not to defeat, but to themselves. Seneca wrote, in a letter that has crossed 2,000 years to sit in this conversation with us today. It is not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It is because we do not dare that things are difficult. The difficulty of your life, the specific, particular difficulty of the gap between who you are and who you are capable of becoming, is not evidence that the decision is wrong. It is evidence that you have not yet fully made it. The decision, when it is genuinely made, when it is made at the level of identity rather than intention, does not eliminate the difficulty. But it changes your relationship to it completely. Because you are no longer fighting the journey. You are on it. Closing of Part 1. We have covered extraordinary ground in this first part of our conversation. We have looked at the nature of the one decision, and why it is different from every other decision you will ever make. We have sat honestly with why we negotiate with our own potential, and named the specific, sophisticated fear that keeps brilliant people parked at the rest stop of their own lives. We have examined what the decision actually requires, not certainty, but commitment, and understood the difference between these two things with the clarity that distinction deserves. And we have looked at what the moment of decision actually feels like in the real, honest, uncinematic experience of people who have lived it. But we are not done. Because in part 2, we go to the place this conversation has been building toward from the very first sentence. We talk about what happens after the decision. What the life that follows actually looks like, in its beauty, its difficulty, its surprising and often counterintuitive demands. And we talk about how to protect the decision once it is made. How to keep it alive in the face of everything that will try, from outside you and from inside you, to walk it back. The decision is the beginning. There is something nobody tells you about making the one decision. They tell you about the courage it takes to make it. They tell you about the transformation that follows it. They tell you, in books and speeches and the highlight reels of people who have already arrived on the other side, about the liberation, the clarity, the sense of finally living in alignment with the fullest truth of who you are. What they don't tell you is what happens in the days immediately after. The doubt that arrives, not loudly, not all at once, but quietly, persistently, like water finding its way through the smallest crack. The people who look at your decision with concern in their eyes and carefully worded questions designed to make you reconsider. Keeping it is where the real transformation lies. What happens after the decision? When a seed is planted in the ground, something happens that the impatient eye completely misses. For weeks, sometimes months, nothing visible occurs. The surface of the soil looks exactly as it did before the seed was placed there. Someone walking past would have no evidence whatsoever that anything significant was underway. But underground, in the darkness, in the silence, in the complete absence of any external validation that the process is working, the seed is doing the most important work of its entire existence. It is cracking open. It is sending roots downward before it sends anything upward. It is building the invisible infrastructure that will determine how tall it can eventually grow and how strong it will be when the storms come. This is exactly what happens in the period immediately following the one decision. On the surface, often nothing dramatic. The job doesn't immediately change. The bank account doesn't immediately reflect the new reality. The people around you don't immediately see a transformed person. You wake up in the same bed, in the same life, facing the same circumstances. But underground, in the interior of your life, in the quality of your attention and the direction of your energy and the nature of the choices you are now making from a different foundation, everything has shifted. The roots are going down. And this period, this invisible, unglamorous, externally unremarkable period of underground growth, is the period when most people abandon the decision. Because they are measuring the wrong things. They are looking at the surface when all the meaningful activity is happening below it. A woman named Constance made the one decision on a Tuesday afternoon in October. She decided, completely, without the internal negotiation that had accompanied every previous attempt, to build the business she had been talking about for 6 years. By the following Tuesday, nothing had visibly changed. She still went to the same job. She still came home to the same apartment. She had not yet told most of the people in her life. The business existed only in a notebook and in the reorganized interior of her commitment. Her sister, who loved her and meant well and was operating from her own fear on Constance's behalf, said something that could have ended everything. "You've said this before. What makes this time different?" It was a fair question. It was also, and Constance understood this in the moment with a clarity that surprised her, completely irrelevant. What made this time different was not something she could point to externally. It was not a new plan or a better strategy or more favorable conditions. What made this time different was internal. It was the quality of the decision itself, the fact that it had been made at a level of depth and commitment that her previous attempts had never reached. She couldn't explain that to her sister. So she said something simple and returned to her notebook. I just know. 3 years later, Constance's business was generating more income than her previous job. Not because the idea was better than anyone else's. Because the decision behind it was different from anything she had made before. The roots had gone deep enough. And when the time came, it grew. The 3 forces that will test the decision. Once the decision is made, genuinely made, at the level we have been describing, 3 forces will arrive to test it. They arrive for everyone. Without exception. And understanding them in advance is one of the most powerful things you can do to protect what you have decided. The first force is the voice of the past. This is the internal voice, familiar, credible, speaking in your own accent, that knows every failure you have ever experienced and will use each one as evidence against the decision you have just made. Remember the last time you tried something like this? Remember how that ended. Remember what people said. Remember how you felt. This voice is not your enemy. It is your history, trying, in its clumsy and often counterproductive way, to protect you from pain it remembers. But it is speaking from the past. And the decision you have just made is oriented entirely toward the future. The Stoic response to this voice is not to silence it. It is to hear it, fully, without resistance, and then to make a conscious, deliberate distinction between what was true then and what is true now. Between who you were when those failures happened and who you are standing here today, having made a decision from a depth that the previous attempts never reached. You are not the same person who failed before. You are the person who learned from it. Hear the voice. Thank it for its concern. And keep moving. The second force is the resistance of the environment. Your environment, the people in it, the systems of it, the expectations that have accumulated around the previous version of you, was built around who you were before the decision. And environments, like all systems, resist change. Not out of malice. Out of the same instinct toward equilibrium that governs most of the natural world. The people who are most comfortable with the old version of you will, consciously or not, apply gentle but persistent pressure to return to it. Not because they want you to fail. Because your transformation requires them to update their understanding of who you are. And that is work. And people, generally, prefer not to do that work unless they have to. Marcus Aurelius faced this in a way that was almost incomprehensibly demanding. As emperor, one of the most powerful men in the world, he had made a decision to govern from philosophy rather than ego, from virtue rather than vanity. And every single day, the environment pushed back. Courtiers who preferred manipulation. Generals who preferred brutality. Systems built around the assumption that power and integrity were incompatible. He held the decision anyway. Not dramatically. Not with grand announcements. Simply, quietly, daily, return to the decision. Return to the values. Return to the person he had committed to being. You will need to do the same. Every time the environment pulls toward the familiar, return to the decision. Not with force. With the quiet, grounded, unhurried certainty of someone who knows exactly where they are going. The third force is the seduction of the almost. This is the subtlest and in many ways the most dangerous of the 3. The almost is the version of the decision that is 90% committed but retains just enough of the old reservation to make full transformation impossible. It is the person who has decided to go all in, but keeps one small, carefully hidden escape hatch open. Just in case. Just to be safe. I'll pursue this fully, but I'll keep the backup plan active. I'll commit to this completely, but I won't tell anyone until I'm sure it's working. I'll go in this direction entirely, but I'll give myself a way out if it gets too hard. These seem like wisdom. They present themselves as prudence, as maturity, as the reasonable middle ground between recklessness and paralysis. They are not wisdom. They are the almost. And the almost is the thing that has kept more brilliant people from the life they were capable of living than any external force in the world. Because the escape hatch is not neutral. Every unit of energy that goes into maintaining it, into keeping the backup alive, into the mental bandwidth of managing the contingency, is energy that is not going into the decision. And the decision, especially in its early stages, needs everything you have. Seneca, who understood the cost of the almost better than almost any thinker in history, wrote, "If a man knows not which port he sails for, no wind is favorable. Close the escape hatch. Choose the port. And let every wind that comes, favorable or not, move you toward it." The daily practice of the decision. Here is something that surprised me when I first understood it. The one decision is not made once. It is made every day. Sometimes several times a day. In the small moments that seem too insignificant to be related to anything as large as the transformation of a life, but are, in fact, precisely where that transformation either happens or doesn't. Every morning when you wake up and choose to spend the first hour in service of the decision rather than in the consumption of other people's content, you are making the decision again. Every time you sit with the discomfort of doing the difficult thing rather than retreating to the easy one, you are making the decision again. Every time the voice of the past speaks and you hear it and keep moving, you are making the decision again. Every time someone questions the direction you are going and you respond not with defensiveness but with the quiet, settled confidence of someone who knows where they are headed, you are making the decision again. This daily practice is not a weakness of the decision. It is not evidence that the original commitment was insufficient. It is the decision becoming identity. Because identity is not formed in a single moment. It is formed in the accumulation of moments, each one small, each one seemingly insignificant, each one adding a layer of neurological and psychological and spiritual substance to the person you are in the process of becoming. A man named Elias decided at 34 to become a writer. Not as a hobby. As a vocation. As the full, committed, unapologetic expression of what he was capable of. He wrote every morning for 2 years before anything he wrote was published. Every single morning. Not when inspiration visited. Not when conditions were favorable. Every morning, before the rest of his life began, he sat down and made the decision again. Not the decision to be a writer someday. The decision to be one now. Today. In this hour. With these words. By the end of those 2 years, Elias had not just a body of published work. He had something more valuable than that. He had an identity that had been built, brick by brick, morning by morning, decision by repeated decision, into something solid enough to stand on. He was not trying to become a writer anymore. He simply was one. That is what the daily practice of the decision produces. Not trying. Being. The compounding effect, what the decision builds over time. Albert Einstein is reported to have called compound interest the eighth wonder of the world. He said those who understand it earn it. Those who don't, pay it. He was talking about money. But the principle applies to something far more significant. Decisions compound. Every day that you live in alignment with the one decision, every morning practice, every held boundary, every chosen discomfort, every return to commitment, adds not just linearly to your growth but exponentially. Because each day of aligned living builds capacity that makes the next day's aligned living slightly easier, slightly more natural, slightly less costly in terms of willpower and resistance. And over months, over years, the compounding produces something that looks, from the outside, like an almost magical transformation. People who haven't seen you in a year look at you differently. People who knew the previous version of you struggle to reconcile what they see now with what they remember then. They want to know what happened. What changed? What the secret was. And the honest answer, the answer that is almost always disappointing to people who are looking for a shortcut, is that nothing dramatic happened. Just the decision. Made once, deeply and completely. And then made again every single day, in small and ordinary and unglamorous moments, until it became not something you did but something you were. This is available to you. Not to a different version of you with better circumstances and fewer obstacles and more favorable conditions. To you. Exactly as you are. Right now. In whatever circumstances you are currently navigating. With whatever resources you currently have access to. The decision does not require perfect conditions. It requires only itself. The life on the other side. I want to describe something to you. Not as a promise. Not as a guarantee. But as a truthful account of what the people who have made the one decision, and held it, daily, through everything that tested it, consistently report about the life they find on the other side. They report a quality of aliveness that is qualitatively different from anything they experienced before. Not happiness exactly, life still brings its difficulties, its losses, its seasons of genuine hardship. But underneath all of it, a current of rightness. Of alignment. Of being, finally and fully, in the life they were meant to be living. They report a different relationship with time. The frantic, scattered, always behind feeling of a life lived in negotiation with itself gives way to something steadier. More intentional. More inhabited. As if the hours have expanded, not because there are more of them, but because they are finally being used for something that matters. They report a different quality of courage. Not the absence of fear, the fear remains, in many forms, throughout the journey. But a different relationship to it. A willingness to feel it fully and move anyway. A growing trust in their own capacity to navigate difficulty that only comes from having navigated it, repeatedly, intentionally, by choice rather than by accident. And perhaps most profoundly, they report a different relationship with themselves. A quieter, deeper, more fundamental self-respect. Not the self-esteem that comes from external validation or comparative achievement. But the kind that comes from knowing, in the bones, beyond any argument, that when the moment of the decision arrived, they did not walk past it. They stopped. They felt the fear. And they chose themselves anyway. That is what is available to you on the other side of the one decision. Not a perfect life. A genuine one. The invitation. I want to close this conversation by speaking directly to the part of you that already knows. Because it does. The part of you that felt something when the title of this conversation landed. The part that has been nodding, quietly but unmistakably, at various points in what we have discussed today. The part that has been carrying, for weeks, for months, for years perhaps, a sense of unlived life. A sense of potential that has been politely, carefully, responsibly contained. That part of you is not wrong. It is not naive or idealistic or disconnected from the real demands of your real life. It is the most accurate part of you. The part that has been telling you the truth about who you are and what you are capable of, long before you were ready to listen. Today, right now, you are ready. Not because the circumstances are perfect. They are not and they never will be. Not because the fear is gone. It is not and it will travel with you for a significant portion of the journey. Not because you have everything you need. You don't, and you will find what you need as you move. But because you are here. In this conversation. Having heard what you have heard today. And something in you, that quiet, accurate, patient part, has recognized itself in what has been said. That recognition is the decision knocking. Answer it. Not tomorrow. Not when things settle. Not after one more preparation, one more research session, one more conversation with someone who will give you permission you do not actually need. Now. Make the decision. The real one. The deep one. The one that closes the internal negotiation and opens the life. And then wake up tomorrow and make it again. And the day after. And the day after that. Until the day you look up from the life you have been quietly, daily, unremarkably building, and realize that everything has changed. Not because something happened to you. Because you decided. And kept deciding. And that sustained, committed, daily, unspectacular and absolutely extraordinary act of deciding. Changed everything. If this conversation reached something in you today, if something in part 1 or here in part 2 landed in a place that feels true and important and worth sitting with, then I want you to know that this is what the Stoic path exists for. Every week on this channel we have conversations that go beneath the surface. Conversations that don't just inspire you for an hour and then dissolve, but that give you something real. Something you can carry. Something that changes the way you see yourself and the way you live your one life. This is the Stoic path. And the life waiting on the other side of your decision.